Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, June 8th, 2023. Tonight's broadcast is an open forum. So, what that looks like, sounds like, is that we take questions throughout the week. You can always send in questions, suggestions. You can share with us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. So, that's the way to get in touch with us. Any questions that were left over from our previous broadcasts or any questions that have been sent in during the interim, go to the top of the queue and we get to those first. We call those the pre-submitted questions. If you want to enter into a question, a comment in during the live broadcast, you can send those in at any time during the broadcast. Sarah, who's moderating for me this evening, will pass those on in the order that they're received. So let me get to the first pre-submitted question and we'll get started. Somebody writes, what if your husband thinks his parents were pretty much perfect and he has no childhood trauma, hurts, or patterns that were negative that have carried into adulthood? In turn, he doesn't see that he has work to do or how that it is best that is the best way to support our son and other children. I saw this question being queued up prior to pressing record and beginning the broadcast this evening. So I had a moment to think about it. You know, I guess my first thought is that's a defense. And a defense, as I explain often, a defense is something that we put up to protect us from something that feels threatening. So I would say the same thing to you about your husband, is that for some reason, in ways that we can probably pretty easily imagine or guess at, he feels threatened by the idea. It's a resistance to look at your own participation in the problem and the issue. So my most practical answer to the question, and this could be really with regard to anybody that we care about, know, or coming into contact with, who might have a problem that they're not willing to look at or be aware of or own. The first thing that I would say is you do whatever works. You know, techniques or strategies like strike while the iron is cold, meaning don't bring it up in a moment of conflict or crisis where tensions and nervous systems are upregulated. Two is model. I mean, that's probably the first thing that comes to my mind is you model for him your own accountability, your own vulnerability, your own strength that is demonstrated through your humility, right? Because we know that humility is born from confidence. Humility is born from a sense of self and from a comfort with oneself. So you model your own work and how it shows up in your life. Invitations, asking. You know, I've said in years past, one of the ways to help people that you care about get into therapy is to bring them into your therapy and frame that as a request for help or support. Now, having said all that I've just said, and I'm sure that there are other strategies that people might employ that you can imagine, the fact of the matter is you can't control it. The focus has to be on your side of the street. And the more energy that anybody, you, aim at trying to get past or get through his defenses, the more that those defenses become fortified. So it's very difficult. I mean, it's in a very simple way. It's a silly thought to have for any of us that we don't have trauma. We might not have anything overt. We might not have what people describe as big T trauma, you know, abuse, death of a loved one. But small T trauma is present in everybody's life. My favorite definition of trauma, and I share this oftentimes to try to demystify or de-shame or just help people feel comfortable with the idea of exploring one's trauma, is trauma can be thought of as anything less than ideal. So part of what I would say to you is your husband has a protection, has a defense. Sorry about my dog barking. Of course, anybody who comes to the door is seen by my dog is a mortal threat to the family, which we appreciate, of course. And nobody's home right now to manage the noise, so we're just going to let her bark for just a moment before I continue answering the question. Then I can delete this out of the podcast version of this. All right. Sounds like she determined that the threat has passed. The fact of the matter is there's no great way to force, to push past this. You've got to create something where your husband feels safe enough. I've said this before, that but part of what I really, when I watch people go through our intensive process, our individual intensive is called Finding You, and it's my it's the flagship program of our intensive program. It's something that I'm passionate about. So when people go through the Finding You program, there are basically two responses that they come away from in the process. The first and most obvious one is they come away thinking, everybody, my husband, my wife, my children need this. My parents need this. I want them to get this. And we can understand that response. It's the same response that probably drives part of the work that I do, is I want to help other people. But the second response, which I don't think it's necessarily better, but it might be a deeper, it might reach deeper levels, deeper depths in our souls, is that we come away from an intensive recognizing, maybe I'm contributing to the problem. Maybe my husband's lack of sharing feelings is because of the pressure and the threat that I'm putting on him. Maybe my wife's inability to tell me how she feels is because I'm not a safe person. So when people walk away from the intensive, when they've identified, this is a beautiful moment when it can happen. People come to the intensive and they've identified their qualifier, if you will. It's a phrase that I'm borrowing from Al-Anon, or Codependence Anonymous, right? That person that qualifies you for your membership in that group. So people come with a qualifier: my child, my son, my daughter, my spouse, my family of origin, my mother, whatever it is. They're the thorn in my psychological side, if you will. When people reach this deeper layer, this deeper level of consciousness that I'm describing, and they say to me, I'm going to go home to my child, my partner, my parent, my qualifier, and I'm going to apologize. I'm going to apologize because I found something here that feels joyful and safe. And part of that equation that feels so safe and wonderful is I see how my issues are contributing to the dynamics in my life, to the problems, to the very things that I'm complaining about. That kind of response, that kind of approach, for me is the most obvious and best way to reduce the threat level in the other person. So keep that in mind as you ask this question. Is there something that you're doing? Is there blaming? Is there an intensity or an energy that's being directed at your husband's defense that would further his sense of feeling threatened? I cannot tell you how many times I have had it happens to fall this way. It could be two women that are married or two men that are married. It could be any combination, but I cannot tell you how common it is for a wife to be the one that is the impetus for a couple coming into our Finding Connection intensive. She wants a more open relationship with her husband. She wants more communication. She wants to connect on an emotional level. She wants her husband to share and to open up. And it has happened so often where after we get into it a day or so, the husband will look at me and my co-facilitator and say, if I knew it was going to be like this, I would have come a long time ago. And why does he say that in these examples that I'm drawing upon? He says that because he, in essence, has been blamed. When he shares his anger and his sadness and his hurt, whatever it is, he's been gaslit. He's been dismissed. He's been told why it's not okay or not real. And of course, that doesn't happen in all cases, but that's a very common pattern, arc, if you will, of a couples intensive or of couples therapy. So be gentle, be loving, be patient, be understanding, be assertive, take care of your side of the street. If it rises to the level of abuse where you can't tolerate it, you get to make the decision that you get to make in that area in life. But our best invitation comes when we lower our defense, when we model our humility, when we take accountability for our contribution to the dynamic. when we focus on, as they say, our side of the street. So thank you for that question. It's very difficult. There's no guarantee that any approach will work, but those are the thoughts that come to mind. Somebody writes, my 16-year-old son has been struggling for over a year now with substance abuse, anxiety, depression, and school refusal. He's involved in illegal activities related to dealing substances. Due to our enforcement of boundaries around substance dealing in our home, he decided to move to our friend's house, not far from us. Mom and I, although grieving and working on ourselves, feel like just waiting for life to teach him consequences is too much. He says he's happy, not interested in coming back. Our communication is in good terms. He says his issues are his issues, not ours. Any thoughts on how to try to get him to come back or help him realize the consequences of what he is risking? Really good questions this evening. They're good because they're not easy to answer. I like your approach so far. I like the idea of, because, right, the job of a parent, really broadly stated, is to help a child, help their children get to where the child needs to go. And sometimes the most powerful thing that we can do, the most powerful catalyst that we can provide for this kind of change, is to allow our child to get what they need from somebody else. So part of what I would say is, let's start by considering maybe the goal is not to come back. Maybe the goal is for him to get what he needs wherever he is. And you say that in your question in part. But there's a part where you ask about getting him back, getting him to come back. Maybe that's not the best thing for him. Maybe that's not the best thing for all of you. Maybe the emotional relationship, in ways that would be difficult to explain in this format, are such that there are triggers and reactions, and that the distance that this living situation is providing might be helpful for him. I would encourage you to stay connected. I would encourage you. One thing that comes to mind with this question is that you be sure to own that your boundary is for you. This reminds me of a principle that I teach very often that's very important in child development and parenting, and all relationships really, is that setting boundaries doesn't work if the driving energy is to change somebody else or to teach somebody a lesson. That's a part of it. That happens. But the primary force and boundaries, ideally, is I'm taking care of myself. So if I were to set the same boundary that you were setting with your son, it would sound like this. I'm not comfortable with this scenario. I'm not comfortable with these things kind of going on in our life, with you living here and doing those things. And if you living with our neighbors is better for you, I get it. And I might even say something like, I wish I had the capacity. I wish I had the patience. Going further, and these are not necessarily the words, but the energy. It sounds like, maybe I'm old fashioned. Maybe I'm too rigid. Maybe I'm an idiot. I don't. The point is, and the reason I bring up those examples is because you're not proposing that you're right, that you're coming from on high, if you will, to teach him the way that it is, but you're saying, this is my boundary. This is my limit. Of course, him being 16, in most of the states in the United States, you could also say, I'm not willing to let you move out. I'm not willing to let you live somewhere else. You're allowed to say that. And like all the things that I talk about as options from parenting or relationships, I want everybody to be very clear that's listening to my voice right now. And that is that I wouldn't tell you what to do, because the goal in parenting and in life is to become an authentic self. And so following a script isn't necessarily the answer. I share examples of what you might say or what it sounds like, to give you options, to give you choices, to open up possibilities of how you might respond, to give you what therapists will sometimes call permission, psychological permission to do something. But if you hear somebody say, Brad said that you should, ... you can know that they're misquoting me, because I don't say that to you. So I I would try to stay connected to him emotionally. I would own the boundary if this were the decision that I was gonna make. If I didn't want this decision, I would own that also, and I would wait for life and maturity to catch up to him. It's really, really difficult. There are no easy fixes, no guaranteed magic tricks, if you will, shortcuts, hacks for this. It's really, really difficult. And from your question, it sounds like you're on the heroic journey. You're discovering, being creative, and trying to find yourself. There's a great line from my favorite book about child development that says something. I'll do my best to quote it. It says, "Even if a mother, a parent, is not especially warm-hearted and nurturing, she can still provide that for her children if only she allows the child to get it from somebody else." That's from the drama, The Gifted Child. The point being is that sometimes I remember I had my son in our program years ago. He's 30 now and he was 13, turned 14. And I was talking to a parent that was struggling, and I said to them, I'll take care of your son." They were doing some service abroad. And I said, "And you're taking care of other people's children. And somebody's taking care of my child." That's the idea of the village, that it takes a village to raise a child. Shame, judgment that you might feel or perceive from other people, those are some of the barriers. As I have described on this broadcast, and I can think of it in the context of many different kinds of parenting strategies. Healthy, authentic parenting will be seen by many people in our communities as bad parenting. There aren't a lot of people that I rub elbows with who parent the same way that I do. And many of them think, and some have told me at times, that I'm crazy and that I'm doing it wrong. But it's my journey, and it's my parenting role is my sacred responsibility. And I have to own that, take responsibility for my own journey. And I have to walk the road less traveled. So I, I want to express love to you and empathy to you and support of you, and just say, I know it's difficult and it sounds like you're trying really, really hard. Those are my thoughts about your question. Thank you. Somebody writes, do some people actually have a secure attachment developed in childhood? It's so funny that you asked that. One time I was describing this in some social media post, and some woman wrote, the research shows that 2/3 of children are said to measure within the secure attachment framework. And I remember talking to my therapist about this, and she was saying, I'm not quite sure what the measure is and where that data comes from. So, and then I've looked it up and I've read similar broad statistics like this, but it's a continuum. I just want to say this. This has been my passion over the last year. What I'm about to say as it relates to this question. Enlightenment essentially can be best demonstrated by realizing your faults and your flaws and your issues. That's almost the best measure of enlightenment. And I'm not talking about shame or guilt or insecurity. I'm talking about humility. When somebody says to me, I feel terrible for the way that I'm parenting, my response is, yeah, that's what it feels like at first. We'll work on forgiveness as we go. We'll work on self-compassion as we go, because that's really important. In fact, that's an important ingredient in you continuing to see yourself honestly. I was saying to my wife last night, not related to this question, obviously. I was saying, in essence, enlightenment is the ability to see the truth, not just about life and about other people, but about oneself. And if you see the truth about yourself, you know that you're a flawed, fallible human being, that you have issues, that you have dents and bruises, that you're not perfect. And the people that I admire the most, that have walked on earth and written books about it and spoken about it in public, the people that I admire the most are the ones who can say, I'm a handful. I got issues. I leak on people. The people that want to talk about how good they are, those are the people to worry about. I've said this as an example. When I walk into a group for a parent meeting and we do some sort of introductions, and generally speaking, there are two kinds of parents. Of course, there are infinite kinds of parent, but in this context, there's two kinds of parents. One says, our child's childhood wasn't that bad. Sure, there were some stuff, but it wasn't that bad. And my thought is, when I hear that from somebody, is that child's going to have a rough go of things in this family. And the other type of family is the parents who come in and say, we know we screwed up. We know we have issues. We have co-parenting issues, marital issues, communication issues. We know we do. And when I hear that, my response is, this child has a leg up on the world. And folks, that's what I just shared and taught you about. That's pretty hard to argue about. When you come to couples therapy and you realize, I'm a handful, I'm difficult. Some of my issues I'm aware of, some I'm not even aware of. But I know I'm not easy. That's the best place to start from. And in fact, maybe better said, that's the best place to arrive at after years and years of therapy. I will tell you this. The years of therapy result in what I'm describing, a humility, an honesty with oneself, a recognition that you are a work in progress for sure. The defense says, I'm good. Sure, a couple of little faults, but I'm good. I have the answers. I know the truth. So, do some people have a secure attachment developed in childhood? More or less, right? It's a continuum. We can think about, we can imagine an ideal for sure. Some people have more or less, but the most secure people talk about their faults and flaws. The most secure people can apologize for mistakes. They're not better or gooder, if you will. My work isn't teaching you all as parents and teaching your children how to be good or better. My goal is to help you to feel safe, to embrace your humanity, your humanness, to pick yourself up after you fall, to learn to apologize, to learn to admit mistakes to yourself, to others. This is the exact same cure, if you will. That's not a good word, but antidote is maybe better. This is the same antidote that people in recovery talk about, the 4th step and the 5th step. Make a list of the people that you have wronged. Tell at least one other person. Later on in the steps, it is go and make an amends, where doing so wouldn't cause further harm to another. This is what we're up against. And I can't be too emphatic. Healthy, wise, enlightened people know and talk about their flaws and their faults comfortably. Defended, more mentally ill people talk about their goodness. Carl Jung said, show me a sane man and I will cure him for you. Or my quote, which is similar, which is, tell me you had a happy childhood and I will tell you that therapy can fix that. This goes back to the previous question. So secure attachment looks like humility, looks like comfort with the self, which is imperfect and messy. And it's a continuum. And although we can think of the ideal, there probably are very few people who have experienced the ideal. I always think about the Dalai Lama and how he got raised by, since he was a young child, got raised by several monks. And this is just me thinking, I'm thinking, now that's a parenting model that might work. Is to have several people around you who are always meditating, always trying to find peace, nonviolence, love, compassion, patience. And when their limits are exceeded, they tap out and another monk walks in. Maybe those are the ones. Maybe the Dalai Lama has a secure attachment, or the most secure attachment, because he was raised by monks who could rotate in and out of the parenting task, whereas the rest of us have to deal with life, energy that we have and don't have, being hungry and tired and stressed at work, having limited resources because we are human. So those are my thoughts about that. Somebody writes, I am 40 years old, a life coach, and have been doing my own work since 2017. Thank you for helping me on that journey. I recently found myself in an abusive relationship where my partner was trying to gain control over me. I used to support survivors and perpetrators of domestic abuse as a job, so I'm having to process and analyze why I've ended up in this position. I've realized that part of this is my own codependency regarding wanting to help and support people that kept me in this relationship. I also struggle to maintain my boundaries throughout. Can you speak about the risks codependent people face when it comes to being manipulated and the nature of coercive and controlling behaviors? As I think this would be very helpful for many. Great question. Great question. Courageous to write it. The fact of the matter, let me go back to a few things, and I'm going to need to look at this question for a little bit, Sarah. So I'll give you a nod when I'm ready for you to pose a new question on the chat. When somebody tells me that they're getting into therapy because they just want to help people, I'm a little bit worried about it. I think that's true of all of us. But we come into therapy as therapists or coaches or nurses or doctors, anyone in the helping profession, to some degree because we're wounded, because we think it's our job to save the world. And if we can't own that energy, that part of ourselves, that codependent part of ourselves, we're going to act it out on other people. So every good therapist that I've ever met, and by good, I mean great, every great therapist that I've ever met is quite aware that in part, what brought them to the healing profession was unhealed trauma and wounds. And that's not an indictment that leads me to want to dismiss them, but rather when they can own that and see that, and all the great ones can, there's a humility with it, right? I'm not the guru with all the answers. When people say, Brad, what would you do? My first thought is, well, why does it matter what I would do? I'm crazy sometimes. I do stupid things all the time. I make mistakes all the time. Ask my family. They'll be happy to share that with you. So it's not about what I would do. It's about being with you on the journey, sharing parts of myself with you to let you know that it's safe, and really encouraging the kind of safety, the climate, if you will, that you would be able and willing to look at your wounds, your unhealed traumas, the things that make you feel less than, too much. So yes, being a coach is probably not for people that suffer from domestic violence, is probably evidence that you had this all along. It's this is important. It's probably why you're good at helping people. My daughter said to me, I've shared this with you before. There's an interview, one of the old podcasts. There's an interview of me, meaning somebody's actually interviewing me. Somebody suggested it. My daughter and another former parent client of mine, I believe it was. And my daughter said, she went off script and she said, I'm going to ask you a question that we didn't talk about. What thing do you teach that you struggle with the most? And I thought about it for a second. I said, that's easy. I struggle with the thing that I teach the most. And that's why I teach it the most. C.S. Lewis said in the preface of Mere Christianity, he said, I can't talk about everything, just things that I have experience with. For example, he said, I can't talk about gambling because I have no experience with gambling in its excess. Neither, this is beautiful, neither do I have experience of which gambling is the excess. In other words, I don't have the light side of that issue either, which might be spontaneity and willingness to take risk, a willingness to experience vulnerability. And gambling becomes its excess, if you will. The point being is the best healers are the ones who have struggled. The best healers are the ones who have made mistakes and had to pick themselves up instead of go away or hide or self-medicate or die. So yes, I think it all Sarah, you can put up the next question. I think it all kind of fits together. It makes sense that you would struggle in this area. And I think by embracing the struggle and the difficulty of it, you'll become a better coach. You'll have more patience. I always say to people, it took me over a decade to get out of a relationship with somebody that was abusive emotionally in my life, and I won't get into the details. It wasn't my wife. It took more than a decade to get out of a relationship that was abusive to me. My therapist all along was right there with me. Looking back, I can see now the cues that she gave me, but I wasn't ready to hear them. And as I've described metaphorically, it was like I was asking for the door out of the room that I was stuck in, the prison that I was stuck in, and it was only 6 feet away, but I couldn't see it. And finally, when I was willing to walk out of the door, it now becomes obvious to me. So because it took me 10 years, because my therapist sat beside me for 10 years patiently, I now can sit with myself, my horrible, rotten self, better. And by horrible, rotten self, I don't mean horrible, rotten self. I mean human self, right? But that's the playful term that we would use in therapy. I can sit with my horrible, rotten self, number one. And number two, I have patience for all the other people that struggle. It's easy to tell somebody, get out of this relationship, set a boundary here, do this healthy, assertive thing here. That takes virtually no talent. First degree graduate students, young therapists, inexperienced coaches, and unkind friends are experts at giving advice like that. But what takes real strength, real depth, is to sit with somebody while they're terrified to take that important step and to understand and have compassion for all the good reasons they have for not digging themselves out of the hole. That's what evokes psychotherapy. That's what these podcast broadcasts are about. Is understanding that this stuff is hard and it takes a lifetime. And we have good reasons for not taking healthy steps forward. If we grew up in a home where there was codependency and poor boundaries, we are going to struggle with that. And if we work on it, we are going to be a light shining for other people too who are struggling. But we have to have patience. Because if we come at people with expertise and judgment and criticism, with a strong arm, if you will, you can't heal somebody's trauma by taking over their sense of self. You can provide them with ideas, with education, with tools, with support as needed, but you can't strong arm people. My therapist calls that in one of her books, good abuse. And as she says, I can't see any way where good abuse would fix bad abuse. If the therapist has the answer for you, find another therapist because that will be their answer. The master therapist is interested in finding your answer to the issue. So yeah, I'm with you. I feel you. It's the same. And when our codependency is alive in our bodies, when we've outsourced our sense of self to other people, when we've let other people define us because our parents and our family of origin operated that way, we're going to be susceptible to these patterns for sure. Somebody writes, next question. Somebody writes, part one, after listening to your recent podcast on abandonment, it resonates with trying to become comfortable with the discomfort of not being able to provide support in my marriage when my partner needs it. Setting a boundary in such instances generates a distinct sense of unease with me. I am attempting to probe the icky feelings that surface. I suspect it's a fear of abandonment, but it's so unsettling that I can hardly sit with it. I feel the urge to do something. I keep hoping that if I explain well enough, if they could just understand me, then everything will be okay. Sitting with the other person's anger or disappointment is nearly intolerable. I feel like I'm coming to this realization over again. Like I've been here before, but this time it feels different. You made a point on the podcast that a parent can't be abandoned by their child, but rather it is the child who can be abandoned by the parent. How does this principle apply to adult relationships, such as marriage? Can abandonment occur in that context? While I suspect your answer is no, could you elaborate on this? I didn't say this as emphatically as I wish I had on the broadcast the other time. So I'm glad that you asked this. If we are operating in our abandonment wound, if my driving fear is being abandoned, which is my driving fear, by the way, if my driving fear is being abandoned, I'm still kept by that wound, right? There's a difference between having a wound of abandonment and the wound having you. Does that make sense? It takes over. If I'm being driven by the fear of abandonment, I can't express my truth. I can't set boundaries. I can't say no. I can't be who I am. I will constantly be trying to feed that monster, that wound, that beast. So for me to be in an authentic relationship, as they say, the ability to be alone is the building block for the ability for intimacy and connection. If I can't be alone, I will be tempted to and have a pattern of giving up myself because having somebody there for me is more important than anything else. And as we develop a secure, an earned attachment through therapy, like I've described, and I can take the risk and tell people the truth about how I feel, set boundaries and say no, drop the ball, let people down. I then have given myself the opportunity for connection and for intimacy. So, with that, you don't know. The answer to the question, it's somewhere in between the parent and child. You can definitely you can definitely have a fight or a flight response to a partner. But only you get to decide at the end of the day if you've abandoned your partner. That's the answer to the question. It's kind of like the question of addiction. In the addiction and recovery world, what we say is your relationship with alcohol and drugs is none of my business. It's not important. It's not spiritually, psychologically sound for me as your father, as your mother, as your partner to diagnose you as an addict. That's not relevant. Not my purview, not my side of the street. I have to work on deciding what's comfortable for me, what I'm willing to tolerate. And in relationship, there's always a give and take, right? Like Joseph Campbell says in the Eden Project, while it's a dense book written by James Hollis, is my favorite book on marital relationships. And in the Eden Project, he talks about this idea. You can't dictate. You have to yield. You have to submit. How much is too much? How much is not enough? And who decides whether it's too much or not enough? And the answer is you. If I were your therapist, I would simply ask questions so that you could see yourself clearly and decide what's right for you. Is having a partner that's a smoker of tobacco a deal breaker? You get to decide. Some people would say, well, that's too fragile. Some people would say that's a clear boundary. Having a partner who drinks, having a partner who laughs loud in a restaurant, having a partner that doesn't go to therapy, that doesn't work on themselves, having a partner that swears too much, that doesn't go to church. I don't get to decide what your line is. What I do know is that the more I grow psychologically, the more my soul expands. And in psychology, when we say soul, which is, the Greek word for soul is psyche. So it's not a ghost that lives in me. It's my deepest, most authentic self. So the more work I do, the more that my soul expands, the more capacity I have to hold people, to be patient, the more I can tolerate in the other and still remain grounded in myself. I am more capable today in 2023 than I was in 2013 and in 2003 and in 1993, for sure. So the same boundaries today wouldn't be the same boundaries for me 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, obviously, because I have different abilities, different awarenesses. So what I will say is If you set new boundaries, if you're getting more boundaried, and remember, when I talk about boundaries, people in recovery from codependency, getting clear about their boundaries, don't necessarily set stricter boundaries. Sometimes they do, but it's not becoming more and more rigid with your boundaries. It's setting what I call better boundaries. Boundaries that come from the self, boundaries that have the intention of self-care, boundaries that come from a place of being authentic, not being right or good or knowing the answer. So as you set better boundaries in your relationships, as your boundaries evolve, as hopefully they do for all of us as we grow, because that's a part of life, right? Shedding the old skin, being reborn over and over again. As we set better boundaries, as you set better boundaries, you will be told by the people around you who are used to the old ways of interacting that you're abandoning them. But what you have to figure out is what's right for you, right? I said something the other day. I said when people critique parents who send children to our program, our wilderness therapy program, and they say a certain thing, and I said, if I'm interested in the conversation, is what I said. And then I said, I'm often not interested in that conversation anymore. But if I were interested, this is how I would respond. And then I gave my thought, my response. I'm not interested in old conversations about proving that the way that I'm living, the choices that I'm making are right. I'm less interested in that conversation. The fresher my growth was, the younger that I was, the newer I was to recovery, to therapy, the more interested in that conversation I was. Because here's how it goes. If I can convince you that I'm right, I don't have to deal with my fear of abandonment by you. I don't have to fear rejection or judgment by you. So if I can convince everybody around me, everybody that I care about, everybody that I'm interacting with, that I'm doing the right thing, if I can prove it to them, if I can help them see it, if I can help my child see that the decision that I've made in my parenting of them is good and right and from love, if it's what Brad Reedy would tell you to do, or what Sigmund Freud would tell you to do, or what Alice Miller would tell you to do, or Donald Winnicott would tell you what to do, if I can stand behind those people, then I don't have to deal with my stuff. Because we're afraid of setting boundaries because we're afraid of abandonment because the wound has us. So I support you where you're at. I support you. You don't get to decide who's abandoning you, so to speak. Couples will say to me, well, now that my husband or my wife is learning about boundaries, they cut off really quickly in conversations. And I think they're doing it to punish me. And my thought is, it doesn't matter what they're doing it and why. Our judgments of them are an attempt to maintain control over the situation in some way, psychologically, intellectually, academically. If I set a clear boundary from a healthy place of self, and my wife walks out of the door seemingly upset, whether she's doing it to punish me or whether she's doing it because she accepts the boundary and she's sad and grieving, whether she's doing it because she's just going to get help from somebody else because I've set a boundary with her, whatever it is, I have the same work to do. It doesn't matter why she's doing or what she's doing. That's not my business, if you will. I remember, I can't remember if it's the dance of connection or the dance of anger, or excuse me, it's not the dance of anger, or the dance of marriage from Harriet Lerner. Whatever it is, it's the book that her husband, it's his favorite book. I remember her telling me that, and I have all of her books. But she gives an example. It's just an example, generic example of a woman in an abusive relationship who finally decides that it's time to divorce her husband, her alcoholic, physically abusive husband. This is a generic example, right? And when she finally decides in this generic example, Dr. Lerner explains that the woman says, I'm leaving. It's not open for debate. I'm not going to explain myself. You can think that I'm the worst wife in the world. You can accuse me of all kinds of character defects and flaws and issues. You can say that I'm abandoning you, that I don't love you, that I never did. You can accuse me of anything because my sense of self is no longer up for debate. It's no longer decided by a democracy. And when this hypothetical person, woman in this case, decides to leave her husband, she doesn't respond to the hooks, to the pushes, to the pulls, because she's sorted out her own wounds. She's worked through her own trauma in this example. So, yeah, what you're describing is everything I talk about and teach in therapy. And I, as the therapist, become this place to find yourself again and again. That's my goal. The sessions with me, even these broadcasts or anything I write, is for you to find you. I love it when I write something or I teach something and someone says, I feel seen. It happened last week with the abandonment episode. And all they're saying is, I'm speaking to the truth of something in their soul that they've always known. Socrates said, I can't teach the people anything. All I can do is help them think. And really, I'm not teaching you new things. I'm just helping you remember things that you've forgotten, that you knew before you were taught any differently by your family of origin or by the traumas of the community that you grew up in or with. So it's difficult. Great question. Somebody writes, so on this continuum of unhealthy to healthy attachment, how do I balance the need for boundaries for me and my desire to accept him as his own self? By the way, a 12-year-old self and even his current 15-year-old self is so unformed. It just begs for guidance. The first ingredient in a healthy attachment is a sense of self in the parent. People that are boundaried aren't less connected to the people around them. They are more connected because it comes from an authentic place. Just think of it this way. What if I just tell you everything you want to hear? What if we're friends and I abandon myself constantly and just agree with everything you say? And yes, there's no conflict. There are no boundaries, but are we connected? Of course, I would argue not at all. In essence, I've abandoned myself and therefore I've abandoned the relationship. So having boundaries, having a sense of self is not a barrier to connection, to attachment. It's necessary. If you don't have it, you don't have connection. And people that are boundaried are the ones that are capable of connection. People that are not boundaried or have fewer boundaries, are less clear about their boundaries, they're not capable of connection. But because of the way that we've been taught growing up, because of what the culture teaches us, we get confused. We think enmeshment is connection. We think a consensus is connection. I love the quote that somebody shared at a friend's wedding many, many years ago, a young person's wedding. Some old guy got up, I think it was the uncle, the grand uncle, the great uncle. And he stood up at the wedding breakfast and said, my thought is, my advice to the couple is if they're not fighting, if you guys aren't fighting with each other, one of you is an idiot. And I love that quote. Boundaries are the only way to be connected. Otherwise, it's just two non-selves, or at least one non-self. Boundaries make connection possible. My favorite quote about boundaries, I think, illustrates it beautifully. My favorite quote is, a healthy boundary is the distance between me and you at which I can love me and you simultaneously. So connection and boundaries they go hand in hand. Healthy connection, healthy attachment has lots of clear boundaries. Unhealthy attachment is reactive, is dependent, placating, pleasing, fighting, arguing, controlling, not boundaries. All right. Thank you. Somebody says, our son that's at Evoke currently had trauma from his younger brother, who we adopted as fetal alcohol syndrome. I think that is what that is. FASD. Is that what that is? Tell me if I'm wrong about that if you're on here. There have been big traumatic events surrounding his younger brother and the two siblings have a very toxic relationship. How do we, in 12 weeks, etc., live together as a family again when our son comes home? And second, how do we start to repair that sibling relationship? Evoke son is 16, adopted son is 13. Thanks. One thing I've learned as a therapist over the years is that the most under talked about, under considered trauma is sibling trauma. So first, I just want to validate your experience. Second of all, and this is it's gonna sound generic, but it's not. Make sure you're in Families Anonymous or Codependence Anonymous, or even for you folks who prefer, therapy. I have a preference for therapy over 12-step. I've been to both, of course. I still would encourage you to try 12 steps because the people in 12 steps, the principles in 12 steps are pure. The idea of relationships and boundaries and codependency and healthy attachment, they're pure. And they're carried on in those rooms. Whereas therapists who haven't done their work might be well versed in psychological theory, right? They might have a lot of tools in their tool belt. They might even be very intelligent academically, intellectually speaking, but they might not have done their work. And that's not the way it works in the 12-step group. So I'd encourage you to go to the 12-step groups and realize you can't fix this stuff. I said this to somebody not too long ago. Kids that come to our program with trauma, you don't fix them in 12 weeks, 10 weeks. You don't. Hopefully, what you do is you get the family and the child on the path that everybody has some sense of what the project is for them, what the work is for them. And you adopted a child with some significant deficits, and that child is going to affect your family. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a thing. It's just your family. And it's going to take work. So my answer is get into the work and stay in the work. Find somebody that you trust, that cares about you, that's not judgmental or rigid or again is looking to give you their answers. Find somebody who can sit beside you when you're in your unsolvable problems, because you have some unsolvable problems in this family, at least in the near future. And good therapy and good support is in part an ability, a willingness to sit with somebody in their unsolvable problems. So again, I wish I could spread myself and become your therapist, because we would listen. We would work on things and strategies week to week. I would empathize. I would tell you how hard it is. We would come up with ideas or ways of thinking about it that would offer you peace. I would give you a sense that you're not alone because I'm with you on this journey. I would, in gentle ways that don't dismiss your pain, I would encourage you to know that this is the greatest gift at the same time, the greatest lesson. This is life inviting you to a higher plane, to a deeper awareness. And I would be there with you so that pain and that journey that is so difficult didn't make you feel utterly hopeless or alone. So I don't have an answer about how to fix that. You just get into the work and you stay in it. Not because you should or you have to or you're so screwed up, but because the work brings you joy and freedom. That's what this work is supposed to do. It's supposed to bring you peace. It's supposed to give your suffering meaning or help you find the meaning in the suffering. It's supposed to give you hope. And maybe the last piece of it is it's to help you feel not so alone. Because you're not. You're not. And it's just my hope that you can find someone or some people that can share the burden with you, share the journey, and then you can do the same with others. And I'm sorry, I wasn't more specific with strategies, but I'm afraid if I try to guess at the exact dynamics and what happened, everybody in your family's feelings matter. They're real. And there's no 4 or 5 or 10-step plan that's going to fix what you have. But get on the journey, stay on the journey if you're on it. Find your tribe, find people that can support you. Find ways to tolerate the dilemma that is yours, that is your life. One last question. Somebody says, what do you do if your child was doing great and after being in aftercare for a few months, she is falling apart? And I found out today they told her I was concerned about her stealing. I want to go get her right now. Wow. I suppose I would tell them. Well, yeah, I know I would tell them. And it's taken me a long time. When I was younger, I tried to be a good client, an easy client. And that's my childhood trauma, right? I don't want to burden anybody. But that last part where they told you something you didn't want to tell you, I'm trying not to swear right now because I'm actually feeling a lot of anger for you. I would tell them how they screwed up. I would tell them that I was pissed. I would tell them it's not okay. I would expect accountability and an apology. The same thing that they're teaching their daughter. I would tell them that you are learning about attachment-based models and that stealing is not the problem, it's a symptom. And that something is beneath it, some trauma. And I would tell them, and until they can figure that out, they should stop doing therapy. I'm getting angry about it because I want to defend you and your child. And I would let them know if they're not up to the task, then you'll find somebody who is. You know, one thing you can share with people, maybe this is unfair of me, but I don't care. Share with people the Google Brad Reedy, psychology versus therapy. Brad Reedy, psychology versus therapy. And my wife and I wrote an article for the NatSap Journal, I think in 2017 or 18, about attachment-based therapy, basically, and the difference between just applying psychology to somebody versus therapy, which is healing, which is safety, which is compassion, which is non-judgment, which is humility, of course. All the things that we want our clients to learn, we have to model. And we can't take our clients any farther than we've gone. So I want you all to be critical consumers of your therapists, of your programs. It's really important. Like I always say, you deserve to ask tough questions and you deserve intelligent answers. And you deserve to have therapists and professionals that are doing their work. And I'm not talking about certifications. I'm not talking about degrees or letters behind their name. Those are wonderful and important and valuable. I'm talking about somebody who knows that their stuff stinks too, that they got issues. And you can feel that in their presence, that they're not talking down to you. They're not dismissing or gaslighting you. They don't say to you if you go and complain, and you go and complain to them that it's your issue. They understand. They show compassion. They model humility. They can apologize. So, yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, folks. Time's up for this week. Let me go to upcoming announcements. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. I narrated the second one, not the first one, just for those of you who want to know. If you would like to do a deep dive into your own work, Finding You is our flagship program. Like I've said before, if you don't want to go to ours, I will give you the name of other programs that do the same kind of work. I'm preferential towards ours, but I believe in it. And if you don't go to ours, go to somebody else. The next available offering is June 21st through 25th. I believe there might be 1 spot left. June 19th through 23rd is the next offering. We also have 1 online program, Finding You, per about every other month or so. The next offering is July 14th through 16th. It's half the time, a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. So if money or time is one or two of the reasons why you can't do this work, then the online option is fantastic. We started during the pandemic, and I was very, very pleasantly surprised by it, and we continued doing it after. We have a Returning to You program for those of you who have been to Finding You. October, actually, that date will change. We're changing that date. I think it's the October 25th is the new date. I'll have the new date up next week. And then I'm doing a Finding You in a couple weeks in the UK. There's a waiting list there, but if you're curious, you want to be on the waiting list, check it out. We also have custom Finding connection programs for couples, parents, and also finding family for families. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups for current families and alumni families. So if you are a current or an alumni family, June 15th at 6:30 p.m. is the next offering. If you are an alumni, once a month we have an alumni only meeting. So people that are a little farther along on the journey. June 27th at 6:30 p.m. is the alumni only meeting. If you're an intensives alumni, June 13th at 6 p.m. is the next offering, support group for that. Visit evoketherapy.com/family involvement for more information. We also have family treks. If you're a current family and you want to spend extended time in the wilderness experientially, we have the Family Trek program. A family trek is an extension of the mid-program or end-of-program visit. It's customized by the participant's therapist. Typically, it's 3 to 4 days, 2 to 3 nights long. It comes at an added cost. Parents interested in the family trek should notify their participant's therapist, who will work with them to create a customized experience. Contact admissions at evoketherapy.com if you have questions about that. If you would like a coach, family coach, parent coach, couples coach, individual coach, stage of life, guilt, shame, codependency, our coaches are wonderful, have a vast array of experiences and backgrounds, and all of them have been introduced and trained in the attachment-based model. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com to learn more or sign up with a coach. Like I said earlier, we ask all current parents to try out at least 6 12-step support groups. Any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also try RefugeRecovery.org or NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, for free classes and resources in your local community. All these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. You can also search there, Finding You at Evoke Therapy Podcast. Subscribe, like, and give us a rating or feedback there. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen to us there. You can find all of these broadcasts the next day or so on Evoke's YouTube channel, so you can see the video, the slides, my video presentation. You can find me or Evoke Therapy programs on Twitter and Instagram. For Evoke, just use the handle at Evoke Therapy. For me, use the handle at Dr. Brad Reedy, at DrBradReedy. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, of course, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And our Evoke Therapy blog has wonderful content each week. Somebody shared with me the reason they love our blog is because our staff are talking about their own work. What a surprise. Of course, they're sharing wisdom for families and people that are seeking it out, but Evoke's work is based on the work. It's only as good as the work of the people that work here. If you want to give back for people that can't afford treatment or therapy, the 3 charitable partners that we cooperate with and donate to are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark your You can earmark your donation for a specific population or even a specific program. All right, my next broadcast will be June 13th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'm going to be talking about the role of religion and therapy at Evoke and how we think about it, how I think about it. So I look forward to that. June 13th, 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, religion and therapy. All right, folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.